Stephen King by Jelena. There are many quotes by Stephen King. I choose particularly this one because it kind of describes what he writes about and about his genre. The quote says, "Beyond the light, there is only darkness." I like it because most of his books and short stories are kind of dark. Because he writes about horror, about illness, about fears. So this is why I choose this quote. Who is Stephen King? He is the most famous fiction, fantasy, suspense writer of the 20th and 21st century who writes about horror, paranoia, demons, mental illness, families. He writes those make-me-believe books and stories. He's either hate him or love him. With that said, there are people who love his non-horror books but dislike horror ones. He has heard it many times. "Oh, I know you. You write those scary books. I don't like them." Even though he has many more horror than non-horror books, he has fans on both sides. In this presentation, we'll hear about King's childhood, family, addiction to alcohol and drugs, and coming clean afterwards. Stephen Edwin King was born in 1947 in Portland, Maine. He was only a toddler when his parents separated. Donald, his father, walked out on them. That had so much impact on his childhood and later in life, even his writing. His childhood was mostly spent with his mother and older brother in Maine. Later, he reunited with father, so he would go to Indiana and Connecticut to be with him and his family. King would often have nightmares of his mother in coffin, him hanging from gallows, falling down the toilet, and similar. As a teenager, he started using light drugs that later became heavier and was even arrested just months before graduation. Too much under influence, whether alcohol or drugs, he was caught stealing traffic cones. King met his wife Tabitha Spruce in the library where they both worked at the time. As he couldn't get a job after getting his BA in English, he worked as a laborer in industrial laundry too. Life was a struggle to live on some low pay he was getting and her loans. She was working in Dunkin' Donuts, and at some point they lived in the trailer. He was drinking heavily and becoming more and more frustrated with his unsuccessful career as a writer. From time to time, he would be able to sell some of his short stories to men's magazines. In 1971, he started working as an English teacher in high school during the day and still writing in the evening. Finally, in 1973, he could do what he loved the most as a full-time. His first book was published. That was also a year when his mother died, and he suffered a deep depression. Kings have 3 children, 1 daughter and 2 sons. They live in Bangor, Maine, in red Victorian mansion with a bronze vampire and bats on its gate during the summertime. You can see it on the left. And in Florida, Sarasota County, during wintry months, you can see on the right, which means they are snowbirds. Kings, as family, are all writers. His wife is a novelist and both of his sons. In 1999, Stephen King was hit by a car while on his everyday walk and was very lucky to survive. Interestingly, the driver who hit him died soon afterwards. Let's talk about King's fears. They are really important because they are his main drive. That's what he writes about. He writes about his fears or someone else's fears. So for example, first we'll talk about bats and bugs. with creeps and crawls. He says he's afraid of those, but he's not afraid of snakes, which I find interesting. I hate snakes. Another thing is his protagonist, in particular Brady Hartsfield. That character is a megalomaniac who desperately wants the world to take notice that he exists. He resents people more successful than he is, and he thinks he is smarter than anyone else. King can scare himself while writing, since he doesn't really plan much in advance. He lets the writing carry him. He doesn't like it, but also he says that it is a strong experience. Another thing that he's scared of is number 13, so he never ends writing on page number 13 or a multiple of 13. He always takes the last 2 steps on his back stairs as 1, so he makes them into 12. The biggest fear that he has is actually losing his faculties. He's afraid of losing his mind. He is afraid of acquiring a condition like Alzheimer's disease. That's a boogeyman in closet now, he says. As we heard before, he was drinking and doing drugs ever since he was a teenager. At some period of time, he did so much drugs and drank so much that he doesn't even remember writing and working on some of the books, not even the day. They would fog his mind. Or they would get him so angry that he was thinking about hurting his own children. He states that he never did, so he decided if he writes about it, maybe it will not happen. And that's what he did. He wrote about hurting his children, and his book, The Shining, in 1977, came as a product of that. That book is about a little boy whose father is alcoholic and trying to kill him. Cocaine was his food, basically. He would sometimes write all night long and snort cocaine so much that he had to put cotton balls in his nose so he wouldn't get blood on his typewriter and paper. And that's not the worst. He was so much addicted to those opiates that he was drinking Listerine. He would pop some pills with the Listerine, and Listerine we know that has some percentage of alcohol in it. Who knows where all would that go if his wife Tabitha didn't threaten to leave him if he doesn't stop drinking and using drugs. After that, King tried his best to keep the family together. There was many tries and false promises, but finally he did it. He came clean. With that, his biggest fear came true. He could not write anymore. It took a while for his wife and him to get him to write again. They did it slowly, word by word. This was happening in late 80s and beginning of 90s. After being sober and gaining his writing ability again, King's books got different intelligence and depth. He still writes horror books about his and everybody else's fears. Some of his books are Carrie, which was the first one to be published in 1973, then The Shining, Misery, It, Mr. Mercedes, The Green Mile, Under the Dome, The Outsider. Outsider was published in 2018.